Hey everyone, welcome. And hopefully for most I can say you actually welcome back to the exam preparation video series for AZ-500, Microsoft Azure Security Technologies. I'm Peter de Tender and I'm a Microsoft Technical Trainer here in the West UST. In this episode, we'll focus on secure networking, covering how to plan and implement security for virtual networks. Next, plan and implement security for private access to Azure resources. Next, planning and implementing security for public access to Azure resources. Here is a list of all the different skills you may be tested on at the exam. These are sometimes referred to as may include, meaning they may or may not be on your exam. This list isn't exhaustive. And while we won't be covering every skill in this video, be sure you are able to perform these skills before taking the exam. A little tip here, pause the video or grab a screenshot and make sure you understand each and every detail of the plan and implement scope for each of the services listed. Kicking off this session with the best recommendation I can give you, well, not for the exam itself, but for overall managing your networking security and broader security aspects for that matter, by positioning the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark Controls, or MCSB. This slide only mentions 3 of them, starting with data protection, which in your head should connect the dots on what this means from a secure networking perspective. Features like data security in transit and at rest, access control to data assets, data encryption, and securing connectivity to Key Vault are just a few examples to know about. Network security is another MCSB pillar. This covers the obvious virtual networking, cloud and hybrid, as well as securing DNS, but also how you would mitigate cyber attacks. Which leads to the third control example here, logging and threat detection. Using SIEM and SOAR solutions like Defender for Cloud and Sentinel will give you great exposure to attack insights and how to detect them. Network security usually starts with firewall rules, which in Azure is handled through network security groups or NSGs, as well as application security groups or ASGs. Shouldn't be a surprise, you need to know the different use cases for each, as well as the core difference when to use what. Azure VNets, or virtual networks, are the logical layer for IP segmentation, pretty similar in mindset as an on-premises VLAN. Azure networking topologies are very flexible, offering various connectivity configurations. Understand the difference between hub and spoke with direct connectivity, as well as mesh topology. For more complex network topologies, I would also recommend you looking more into Azure Virtual Network Manager, understanding what it does, as well as overall how NSG rules are getting validated and applied. As mentioned, Azure VNets are flexible and allow for a lot of different topologies, ranging from a small single VNet to multi-region across different Azure data centers in different geographies. To add even more configuration and routing options into these topologies, the answer is UDRs or user-defined routes. You would usually implement these when using virtual appliances, such as third-party firewalls or load balancers. Adding to the flexibility of VNets are peering features and VPN gateways. Peering is where you interconnect different Azure VNets with each other, within the same region or across regions. If you need additional encryption, or you want to establish encrypted connectivity to an on-premises hybrid network, you would use VPN gateways. Remember the scope of the exam test you on planning and implementing. Planning refers to know when to use what service and why. Implementing means you need to know how to get the service or Azure resource up and running, and being familiar with its features and settings. That's why we have this slide here on virtual WAN. In short, you need to know the sequence of steps to get virtual WAN up and running, how to integrate the VPN gateways, as well as Virtual Hub into the topology. This is best done using a practical lab, if you do have access to it. We already covered the Azure VPN Gateway, but there are other ways to integrate secure connectivity. One solution here is application proxy, allowing for secure remote access to on-prem running web applications, where the security is coming from the user authentication through Entra ID, not using VPN. And as you heard in the first session when we talked about Entra ID and secure application access, conditional access is the main service to optimize all this. We covered VNets and Azure VPN solutions, which also means we need to position ExpressRoute. This is a telecom-provided direct network connection between on-premises data centers and Azure, typically not encrypted, since it's a private connection, not routed over the public internet. However, a little reminder here with this slide, encryption over ExpressRoute is still an additional option you can configure. This is a slide that I like a lot when teaching AZ-500 or Azure Network Security in general. As mentioned earlier, Azure provides a lot of flexible network topologies and features. This slide emphasizes that all those are still valid when discussing ExpressRoute. Understand the difference between Azure native firewall controls or using third-party next-generation firewall solutions. Also, understand the impact of your ExpressRoute location, as it can affect how those firewalls are working. Planning and implementing secure networking also means knowing what is happening within your network. That's what Azure Network Watcher is helping with. Make sure you understand the different use cases of the service, as well as how to configure them. Also know how to set up virtual network flow logs, allowing you to store logging information into Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, or using logs into Sentinel as your SIEM solution. This brings me to the next 3 slides in this session, covering service endpoints, and private link. This first slide here covers service endpoints. By using service endpoints, resources running in a virtual network, typically virtual machines, can reach non-VNet Azure services without leaving the Azure backbone. Private endpoints provide a similar use case, but the setup is slightly different. With private endpoints, the Azure resource or service gets linked to a private IP address in the range of the VNet of choice. Any connectivity you have within the scope of the VNet within Azure, peering, or hybrid with VPN or ExpressRoute is now also possible to and from the Azure service using that private endpoint. Which left me to talk about Private Link. Its main purpose is securely connecting to Azure services over a private endpoint in your virtual network. Similar to private endpoints, the service is using an internal IP from the VNet it's connected to, keeping all traffic within Azure. I think with that, we have all VNet security options out of the way, where the second half of the episode covers network security integration for PaaS or Platform as a Service scenarios. Starting with Azure App Services and functions in this slide. What you need to know for the exam is how you would allow or block network connectivity for both scenarios using gateway integration or regional VNet integration. Also remember App Service Environment or ASE, which gives you everything from the traditional app service in Azure, but running on dedicated hardware for your organization. Since this setup is more complex, it shouldn't be surprising there are several key considerations around network security for this solution in Azure. Pause this slide or grab a screenshot and go through the details of each item when studying. Another non-VNet service scenario needing network security are Azure databases. where this first example covers Azure SQL. Referring back to the MCSB mentioned at the start of this episode, know that Azure SQL Managed Instance meets different secure networking controls, covering network security, logging and threat detection, as well as data protection. Starting with secure network controls on the connectivity side, we're looking at TLS or Transport Layer Security, which means using certificates. While this is positioned here as part of Azure databases, know this can be stretched to app services as well as API management. More and more modern applications rely on API calls between web apps and data endpoints to retrieve and post information updates. Although this slide on Azure Firewall and Firewall Manager could maybe fit better in the main VNet section of this episode, the service is so powerful in capabilities and not only limited to VNet scenarios. Again, make sure for the exam you recognize the use cases when it would be a recommended solution. You are familiar with its different capabilities, and you also know how to implement as well as manage the service. Which leaves me with only 3-4 slides to cover anymore, discussing load balancing capabilities for applications. Since we're focusing on PaaS in this second part of the episode, we position 2 main load balancing scenarios here, starting with Azure App Gateway. This is the Layer 7 load balancer you would implement for HTTP/HTTPS applications. Know the difference between its features compared to the traditional Azure load balancer. The same goes for this next one here, Azure Front Door. Partly advanced load balancer for Layer 7 HTTP/HTTPS workloads, it also provides CDN or data caching features. Main difference, by the way, between Front Door and App Gateway is it allows for multi-region load balancing. Last, we cannot discuss App Gateway or Front Door without emphasizing on Web Application Firewall or WAF. Both load balancing services allow integration with WAF, bringing in advanced protection against common exploits and vulnerabilities. By the way, the rules are based on the OWASP framework, as well as customizable rules for you to configure. Oh, and I almost forgot, at the end of this secure networking session, don't forget about Azure DDoS, and more specifically, the difference between the platform-provided DDoS protection and DDoS protection standard. And no, I'm not only pointing at one being free and the other one coming with a cost. With all that, we're at the end of this second episode. So let's close off with a recap. This episode was all about Exam Objective 2, Secure Networking, in which we discussed planning implementing security for virtual networks, planning and implementing security for private access to Azure resources, and planning implementing security for public access to Azure resources. Thank you for watching episode 2 of AZ-500 Exam Prep. Remember, this covered about 20 to 25% of the exam questions. Allow me to invite you to join me in episode 3, where we will discuss Exam Objective 3, Secure Compute, Storage, and Databases.